Welcome back everyone to my office studio. And to get started, what I like to do is in traditional kind of instructional fashion that I like to do is I'm going to start with going bare bones with just the stock audio on your computer plus the addition of this new Skookum camera that you just added by Logitech. Now I'm going to push my big USB microphone out of the scene because I'm not using it right now. So what you're listening to is just a stock microphone built into, in my case, my Mac, and the default now, which is the Logitech C920. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my display. This is the interface for the Logitech Capture app. So you can tell right now I just toggled between my input 1, which is my camera, and input 2, which I've set to my entire display of my computer. Now, I can also do the same thing down here, and I'll cover these icons in a second. First things first, what I want to do is kind of do a breakdown of the stock audio that you have on your computer, the stock audio that you have on the camera, and the difference of using a good external audio capturing source. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and drop my default microphone down, go to the built-in microphone on the C920 itself. So here is my camera. So what you're listening to now, between the two, is the C920 versus the onboard microphone. It does good in a pinch for recording, but again, I'm not a huge fan of either option, either the built-in one that you have on your computer or even this one on the C920. Now let's go ahead and go one step further, and just by plugging in a USB microphone, the one that I usually recommend, which is the Shure MV5, view and come back into my microphone. So again, adding a camera is just one half of the equation that we're doing for elevating your production. Adding a camera is good. It gets you that extra clarity that you need. But again, we also need to be able to hear and have good quality audio capture, whether that be through this mic or again through a lavalier microphone or however you like to capture. So now that I have my audio settings set up, let me go back to the app. And don't worry about this cascade. This cascade effect we see even in OBS, and this is just because in the app itself, I'm capturing my full display. So it shows that actually what we're capturing, which is our full display, is indeed working. Now that we have audio out of the way, let's start with our video. I'm going to go ahead and go into my second view, which is this display that we see right here. And you can tell that my source is set up as display 1. Now, if you have multiple monitors, you can select those as well, or we can select our Logitech camera. We can also display anything that is running. So for instance, web browser of choice, you'll notice that window capture now turns up. And this allows you to just isolate, and nobody can see anything other than what is in the toggled window. And this is going to be your preferred method of doing stuff, especially if you're using PowerPoint or Keynote. This allows you to isolate your slide deck and then have your camera separate from that. So what do I mean by that? Well, so all I'm going to do is switch back to my display 1. So I'm back to display 1 so you can see what's going on. And let's take a look at these icons down here at the bottom. Now, camera 1 is, input 1 is my camera. You can set this to anything you'd like, but it kind of makes sense to have it as your camera so you have that full screen camera. Camera 2 I have is my whatever I'm capturing. So in this case, I have my full display, and we have a mix of 1s and 2s and rectangles. And what these allow you to do is toggle between a picture-in-picture, which is denoted by the smaller square, and the bigger square is the main focus of your content. So in this case, if I turn this on, hey, look, I have my picture-in-picture, I'm down here in the corner, and I have my content up above so I can do my instruction. Now, when we do this, we can also invert it so that I'm the main focus, and this is kind of like the sports replay. We can tell that we made a foul on the down here, whatever. And we can also do things like split view. We see this a lot in the news. Here are the results of what's going on in whatever state. And then we can also switch those around as well. Now, when you're doing split view, you can't really do anything more. It's just the preset of what Logitech has specified. But if you go into picture-in-picture, here's a nifty trick. You can move yourself. So for instance, I'm going to move myself over that cascade effect just so that it's a little less distracting for everyone. And when I do this, it allows me to have my picture-in-picture wherever I choose, which is really cool. And you can do this also with the fourth option as well, moving your content. So you have that kind of, I don't know, comedy show effect where it's just like, in the news today, here's my lecture. So You can use that at your advantage. And again, I'm doing this live as I'm recording. There's nothing different between what I'm doing. I'm doing my whatever's on my display, and everything is being recorded. Now I can tell that because if you look here in the top, well, actually I have to move my picture in picture. If you look here on the top right, you can see my counter. This is how long I have been recording. And everything that I do is live. This is really a tool meant for live production. And when you record it, if you can do it all in one take, it saves you some editing. But these files are totally editable. You can use Windows Video Editor, you can use iMovie Final Cut, you can use DaVinci Resolve or HitFilm. Any editor will take these files and allow you to edit them later. But for those that are using this live, this also gives you another tool, which I'll cover in another video when we get to what's called virtual cameras. Virtual cameras basically allow you to use software like this or OBS, but hook it into your Teams or your Zoom call to get these added features, which is really cool. But that's a totally separate video, and that's going to come later. Getting back into our interface. So when we look at this, I've specified what my display is. And again, I could have this as an active window if I have it. I can switch back to my camera, which again, you're going to lose my display. So that doesn't do us very much good for this tutorial. So I'm just going to keep it as my full display here. Now, if I were to go back to my camera, I'm going to go ahead and go into picture-in-picture so that I'm up on the screen. And I'm going to cover up a little bit of that cascade just again, because I don't want to have too much of a distraction of what's going on. So looking at this, let's go ahead and let's kind of fix a little bit of this washed out look that I have of my camera that I've just plugged into my computer. To do that, if we look over here on the left-hand side of our interface, we have the camera icon. The first thing I'm going to point out, and it's grayed out because I'm actively recording, is the frame rate and the resolution. So frame rate and resolution is going to play a big deal with what you're doing. And again, I mentioned about this error that you may see that is the performance. If you up this to full HD, which is what I'm recording in right now, that's 1080p, your computer may not be optimized for it. So should you find yourself with that error, go back to 720p or adjust the frame rate. Some of the higher end Logitech cameras can go all the way up to 60 frames a second, which is, kind of bonkers. We hear that a lot on the higher end televisions, 4K 60, and really for instruction, most of the time you won't need it. Typically how I record is full HD, 1080, and 30 frames a second. Now also it'll specify where your media files are being located, which if I were to pull that up on my computer, the Logi capture folder. And these are these video files that I can then go ahead and use in my video editor of choice, should I want to do that. So that's the only options that you have under the quote camera icon, but that is not the options for your camera. That actually resides under the source selection. So if I go ahead and go under my source selection, you can tell that my source is selected as my webcam 920. You'll notice that the only cameras you'll be able to select in this icon is supported Logitech cameras. And I'll have a list right around here-ish of where and what the specifications of cameras. Basically, it's the C900 series and higher are supported by this app. Now, priority. So you have an option with this camera with a priority of frame rate versus exposure. Frame rate allows, especially for streaming instances, to keep the camera as a priority of keeping whatever frame rate that you have. Typically for asynchronous instruction, we don't really care about that because we've already specified 30, 24, or 25 frames a second. And so for us, exposure is going to be key. That's how we're going to be able to keep ourselves from looking a little too washed out or whatever. Now you've noticed a few times, and I've done this intentionally, that my camera starts hunting for focus. This drives me bonkers as well as pretty much all students and stream watchers alike. To stop having that happen, look down here, you'll see an autofocus option. Toggle that off immediately. And here's why. By having it locked on focus, by default, you're going to be set to what's called infinity. And that means basically as far back as you stand, you're always pretty much in focus. Autofocus really only helps for when you're getting closer to the camera. But for those of us that are instructing in a fixed spot, we don't need to have that happen. And typically in lower light settings, you'll see that hunting happen a lot, and it drives everybody a little bit kooky. So to get around that, just disable autofocus. We don't need it at this point. The other thing that we're going to disable is white balance, because if you look at me, I look completely washed out. So by turning that off, what this allows you to do, and white balance isn't scary. So we see this also in the back packaging of light bulbs these days. So if you know what light bulbs you have, like those LED lights that you're saving energy on the back of the packaging, you'll actually see what spectrum it is. Usually it's warm daylight or cool daylight. It'll give you a number K, and that stands for that number Kelvin. So if we do the same thing over here, if we take our white balance, we'll see a big number show up. And if we go all the way over down to 2000 Kelvin, you'll notice that I now get very White Walkers from the Game of Thrones. And if I go all the way over to 6500 Kelvin, I will have a very warm sepia, almost old-fashioned tone. Now, I happen to have an external light that I usually use on myself, and this is an LED bulb that's adjustable, and I know what the Kelvin rating of it is, so I can actually take it and dial myself exactly where that bulb is to get a truer tone of my color spectrum. So this is a kind of a nice helpful hack, especially if you're trying to not make yourself look like The Walking Dead. So now if you don't know what your Kelvin is, just play around with this so that you kind of get the look that you're looking for. You don't want to have something too blue or too warm, something in between that just makes yourself look a little bit more natural. Let's go ahead and go to image settings. Image settings allows you to adjust this even further. Once you have the color spectrum adjusted correctly, the only two sliders you'll really probably use are these top two, brightness and contrast. Brightness will allow you to add a little bit more brightness or take away a little bit more brightness, and same thing with contrast. Typically speaking, you're not going to be doing these to the extremes because you'll get very radioactive very fast. If you mess up, do not worry, there is a reset button. Just hit reset and it will tell you to go to default, which is great. So for me, I know that I'm going to go ahead and dial myself down because I have a lot of ample light, as you can tell above and beside me. So I don't need that extra brightness. And my contrast, I'm actually going to reduce just ever so slightly because I'm going to plan on using a green screen. There we go. That looks pretty good. The next part is that green screen because I've got one behind me. Now, it doesn't take much. Again, this is the same drop cloth that I've had for several, I don't know how many instructional videos at this point, and it's not even taught in all the places, which is kind of a good representation of how we're all using this. I know that some of you even have the little green screen thing that goes behind your chair. This will all work for all of that. For me, I'm using a green screen, and you'll tell I've now been somewhat cut out, but man, I've got a lot of funkiness going on. So this artifacting that you're seeing both on the left and the right of me, we can adjust by these sliders. Typically, this right slider will clean up most of your problem, like it just did for me. But if you need to, you can also adjust this one afterwards, which will help kind of wrap things and fill things that may be falling off of your screen. Now, speaking of falling off your screen, if you don't have a screen that fully takes up your entire display, don't worry. What we're able to do is adjust our zoom. Now, the zoom is how we're going to be adjusting, quote, our crop. And to do so, what I'm going to do is move myself a little bit out of the way so that this doesn't look looks a little bit more presentable here. So let's say I was doing a demonstration and I'm going to put this up here and I'll move myself down a little bit. It's hard for me to adjust kind of, I got I'm cut off at the bottom here and I don't know where my sides are. And let's say my green screen is not complete. How can I fix this? Well, what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and turn off my green screen temporarily, just so that I can line myself up. Now I can actually see the bounding box of my display, and I can make myself as big-ish as I want, and I can also center myself on my screen the best I can. At this point, what I'm able to do is I can adjust my zoom. So if I come up here to zoom, we can do is zoom in just ever so slightly, because again, these cameras using 1080p is using a digital zoom so that we don't lose as much resolution, and that way we can also crop quote unquote ourselves to better fit us in the display. So if I were to do this, I might be able to zoom in just a little bit like this and maybe adjust my display like that, adjust it like this, and just like that. Now I'm a little bit better framed. You don't know what's over there. It's just kind of my screen. Now if I turn on my chroma key, ta-da, I'm perfectly cut out. So for those of us that don't have a full screen, or if you don't have the ability to get a full screen, you're able to just adjust it by using a combination of the chroma key sliders and by using the zoom so that you can get the best framing for your room. Okay, so now I've got myself dialed into where I usually do things. I've got a pretty good warm tone. I've got my microphone turned in and I've got my screen. So how do we use this app? Well, now that we've got ourselves pretty well dialed in, there's a couple other things I want to show really quickly. Now, by default, you'll notice that I don't have the quote Logi logo over here on the left-hand side. I get this question a lot. If you use Logitech stuff, you can't record without their watermark, and that's actually untrue. If you go to the magic wand part of the app, you're able to turn on and off the Logitech logo. So if you don't want to have that Logi thing in the bottom right-hand corner, nobody blames you. You can just turn it off. Now, while you're here, you're also able to do things like a text overlay or quote a lower third. So right here, I'm going to put on for instance, my email address for you to email me should you want to tune up on how to use Logitech and the Logi Capture app in your own home setup. Now, I have this set up as forever, so it's always here. However, if you don't want to have that, what you're able to do is you can adjust the slides so that you can have a readability of 2, 5, 10, etc. seconds where it will auto fade in, auto fade out, which is really nice. Now, you can also force it by just hitting the show and hide. So for instance, for people like us that are doing very step-by-step processes, how this usually works is that in our text overlay, we'll have things like step 1, go here, ... whatever the lower third is going to be. And I'll adjust the timing of it. Maybe I want a readability of 10 seconds. So it'll show up down here in the bottom of my display. Now, perhaps I shouldn't be on the display while I'm doing this. So what I'm going to do is adjust it so that all you see is, boop, all you see is my display, because right now we're talking about Logitech Capture and how cool it is. And so for instance, if I wanted to show my step, I can just hit right here and it'll show up. And again, if you're not comfortable doing that, you can totally add these text lower thirds later. But if you do it all in one take, it just helps things along. Also, feel free to just pause. So for instance, you notice we have the big red button, which is how I'm recording. I can also hit the pause button. So as you're doing a take, you may be going, so what we're talking about is the Logitech Capture app over here. And what I'd like to do is talk about how we can jump in between the Logitech Capture and a browser. And while I'm paused, go ahead and come up here and make my next step. Okay, step 2, then here. Get it queued up and get ready. Not as a display, but as the capture of what I talked about before. If you're doing it with a full screen capture, as I just showed, it is a little bit awkward. So it's important to isolate what you're doing. So if you're doing it in a browser, make sure you have your browser queued like I have right here. That way you can run the app in the background. Nobody can see your mouse clicks. That's the real creative trick to all of this is you isolate both your camera, your audio, and the source of the content that you are trying to create. And that way you control everything behind the scenes and nobody knows the wiser. So let me show you the difference now that I did this, just by simply isolating my app right here. Now do a show, then step 2, what we're gonna do is go to your favorite browser of choice, and I want you to go to Logitech, blah, blah, blah. So there's the differentiation specifically of using something as simple as a text overlay with an isolated window versus if we are doing a full display capture where everybody can see everything that you're doing. Like I said, for me, it's a little bit awkward because I'm showing you how to use this capture app while capturing this app with this app. Very meta. It's like this whole cascade. With that said, we can also do things like transitions. They call it scene effects. So for instance, let's say we want to have a filter. I would kind of avoid these personally, but you're able to do it. So for instance, if we wanted to have a little bit more of a whitewashed effect across the entire scene, we're able to do this, black and white, etc. Transitions are down below where we can, when we jump in between two different scenes, we can slide across versus a fade in or fade out. So again, they're a little bit kitschy, and quite frankly, I just tend to just use it as the stock jump cut personally. But to each their own. Maybe you want to have a nice fade as you jump in between different scenes. They're available to you here under your scene effects, both filters and your transition. So that's really all there is to this app. Now, in my next video, I am going to show how to use this app in conjunction as a virtual camera. It allows you to use this app in conjunction with, say, Zoom or Teams or any other myriad of sources if you're doing live instruction. So we'll look forward to that video coming next. But before I go, if you have any questions, perhaps you may want to email me at barse@ww.edu. And if you have any questions, feel free to, or if you have questions on Logitech or tuning up your setup at home, please reach out. That's why I'm here to help. You can also reach the Student Technology Center. They're open Monday through Sunday, and they also have a live chat. So if it's a weekend and you need a student staff member to help you, they're also available just by visiting stc.wwu.edu. And I'll actually put that up here as stc.wwu.edu. See, using the tool as I go. Anyway, I'm AJ Barse. Thank you again so much, and I will see you in the next video.